It started with a glass of water. Maya stared at it on the counter, condensation sliding lazily down its curved surface. She had read somewhere that drinking more water could help her feel more energetic. It sounded absurd in the grand scheme of things. Could a glass of water change her life? Still, after months of overwhelming exhaustion and a nagging sense of complacency in her daily routine, she figured it couldn't hurt. She picked up the glass and drank it slowly. The act felt so simple, so laughably small. But it was something. For years, Maya had lived in a fog. Her days blurred together, long hours at work, frozen meals eaten in front of the TV, and scrolling through social media until her eyes ached. She wasn't unhappy, exactly, but she wasn't happy either. There had been grand plans once. She'd dreamed of learning French, of taking long morning jogs, of connecting with others. But somewhere along the way, those ambitions had been boxed up, labeled someday, and stored in the back corner of her mind. It wasn't that she didn't try. There were bursts of enthusiasm. New planners purchased, gym memberships signed up for, evening classes bookmarked, but they fizzled as quickly as they'd flared. She would abandon the effort when results didn't come fast enough, suspecting maybe she just wasn't the kind of person meant for change. That evening, after finishing the glass of water, Maya hesitated. Normally, she'd sink into the couch immediately after work, but standing in her kitchen, her body felt light, just by the smallest margin. Instead, she took a few minutes to tidy the cluttered counter. "It's just this one spot," she told herself as she wiped it down. When she was done, the gleaming surface made her smile, if only faintly. The next day, she drank her water again, wiping off the counter out of habit now. A week later, Maya found herself clearing the whole kitchen after dinner, instead of leaving the mess for the morning. With every small action completed, she felt the tiniest flicker of satisfaction. It was almost imperceptible, but it was enough. From water came a short evening walk, 10 minutes around the block, while the summer air still lingered warm and inviting. The next week, she swapped one sugary snack for a bowl of fresh berries. She didn't set alarms on her phone or declare grand intentions on social media. Instead, she moved like the tide, pulling back, pushing forward, step by step. It wasn't just about food or movement. The ripples spread outward, to places Maya never expected. When her friend Lydia texted, suggesting they meet for coffee, she said yes instead of her usual excuse of being too busy. She realized how long she'd been avoiding connection, not because she didn't care for others, but because she'd assumed she had nothing to give. But during that coffee date, as she and Lydia joked about memes and shared frustrations about work, Maya felt a warmth she hadn't realized she'd missed. Her world didn't shift all at once. It came in layers, gradual as dawn. Each change was so small, so ordinary, she almost didn't notice how they built on each other. Water became meal prepping, evening walks stretched into morning jogs. Clearing the counter turned into reorganizing her closet. Conversations with old friends led to trying that yoga class she'd always been curious about. 6 months into her quiet transformation, Maya stood in front of the mirror one morning, brushing her hair. The face looking back at her wasn't wildly different. The faint line between her brows didn't vanish, and her arms weren't suddenly toned or sculpted. But there was a lightness in her posture, a subtle glow that no skincare product could mimic. For the first time in ages, Maya felt deeply, unshakably proud. Not for climbing mountains or running marathons, but for saying yes to that first glass of water, that first tiny step. The changes spilled into how she spoke about herself, how she showed up for the people around her. At work, Maya started volunteering ideas during meetings instead of hanging back in silence. She laughed more freely during calls with her parents. The weight of perfection, of trying to get it all right at once, no longer paralyzed her. Her life was no longer stagnant. Each choice she made, however small, created ripples that carried into the next decision, weaving a tapestry of growth she hadn't thought possible. It wasn't about willpower or discipline in the end. It was simply about showing up for herself, every day, in ways so small they almost seemed silly. A year after it all began, on an early spring morning, Maya sat down with a cup of tea by her window. Outside, the trees were waking up, their branches tipped with tender green leaves. She thought back to that first evening and smiled. A glass of water, a few minutes of tidying, it was nearly laughable to think how those moments had led to this. But they had. She didn't have everything figured out. She still had stressful mornings and skipped workouts. But she knew now that what mattered wasn't perfection. It was persistence, the quiet but sweet triumph of simply trying again. Little choices, rippling outward into a life she loved. Maya finished her tea and stood, gazing at the list she'd pinned to her wall. The words, scribbled in her looping handwriting, were ones she whispered to herself each morning now. Small steps, big change, always forward.